Today, we're diving into Blue Sisters by Coco Mellors, a novel that captures the essence of family, home, and the deeply complicated bonds between siblings. This story doesn't just talk about sisterhood, it takes it apart, thread by thread, showing us its raw, unfiltered core. If you've ever had family members who know just how to push your buttons, and love you fiercely all the same, this one's going to resonate deeply. Coco Mellors gives us a story centered on 4 siblings, well, 3 now. One sister is gone, and the other 3 are scattered across the world, London, Paris, LA. But the heart of their story begins when their parents decide to sell the family apartment in New York, the home where their sister passed away. And so, one by one, these siblings return. What follows is a journey of coming back, not just to a physical space but to each other, to the selves they used to be, and to the idea of what home truly means. It's a book about how home isn't necessarily a place but a feeling, something we carry with us and find in people. And let me tell you, the dynamics in this book are electric. The siblings argue, brawl, and say things so cutting, it's like watching a tennis match of emotions, except instead of balls, they're hurling perfectly crafted insults. You're inside their heads, witnessing the moment they think, don't say it, and then they do. But beneath all of that is this undeniable bond, raw, primal, and completely unshakable. Mellors captures the essence of sisterhood beautifully. It's not just friendship, it's something so much deeper. She puts it perfectly in the opening paragraph. A sister is not a friend. Who can explain the urge to take a relationship as primal and complex as a sibling and reduce it to something as replaceable as a friend? Sisterhood, the kind where you grew fingernails in the same womb, is not the same as friendship. And that's what Blue Sisters is. It's bold, beautiful, and bingeable, with dialogue that crackles and prose so silky smooth, you'll fly through the pages. Now, let me share a part of this incredible story. We're going to step into a moment that truly encapsulates the raw and vivid dynamics of these siblings. So what do you think? Prompted Avery. Should we try to stop them? Bonnie didn't know what she thought. That apartment was the only home she'd ever known, both an albatross around her neck and an anchor. For the past year, Avery had been covering the mortgage and monthly maintenance fee, thereby allowing the place to remain empty, but they all knew that arrangement couldn't last forever. The best approach with her family, she'd found, was neutrality. Do you think we should? She asked. I do, said Avery decisively. It's our home, too, and they have no right. Except for the fact they own it, mumbled Bonnie. Whatever, Avery replied, exasperated. She sounded just like when they were teenagers. You seriously don't care if they sell it? Bonnie had loved that apartment, but after what happened there, she knew she couldn't step foot in it again. I guess it's their apartment and I can respect their wishes, she offered. God, I would kill to be as imperturbable as you, said Avery. Bonnie laughed shyly. I don't even know what that means. It means you, unlike me, aren't destined to die of a stress-induced heart attack. But what about all of Nikki's stuff? Asked Bonnie. That she was not imperturbable about. Avery made a low hum down the phone. I know, she said. One of us is going to have to go back and claim it all. I know I'm the closest, began Bonnie, her heart sinking. It's okay, said Avery quickly. No one would expect you to go back in there. I'll figure something out. Bonnie exhaled with relief. She hated that Avery was the one who always had to fix everything in their family and relieved by it in equal measure. Thank you, she said softly. I can't believe it's already been a year, said Avery, her voice low. I know, Bonnie smiled sadly to herself. Time's a trip, man. You sound so LA. How is it out there? Bonnie padded across the living room and let herself out onto the landing, wincing slightly at the sunshine. Great. I'm looking at the ocean right now. In fact, all Bonnie could see was the alley below, where a seagull was wrestling a pizza crust from a garbage bag. She lived on a somewhat squalid street a block from the beach, in one of a number of ramshackle buildings that still offered cheap month-to-month rentals and were therefore viable homes to an itinerant community of surfers, students, seasonal workers, aging hippies, and functioning drug addicts, the kind of people who gave Venice what real estate agents called its local color, but who would never use a real estate agent themselves. That's nice, said Avery. I'm looking at a brief. Still? Isn't it late there now? You know me, said Avery. Bonnie did. Avery used work the way she used to use drugs, to drown out the world. Did you do anything to, commemorate the day? Avery asked. Not yet. Have you? Just calling all of you. If we did want to start a tradition, now would be the time. Bonnie blew a strand of hair out of her eyes. What would Nikki have liked? It's not like there's a howdah for grieving. Avery's voice took on the brisk, efficient quality she usually reserved for her clients. Hold on, I'm looking it up now. Bonnie could hear her begin typing. How to acknowledge death anniversary. Bonnie shook her head and snorted softly. She directed her attention back to the seagull's ferocious efforts as it pierced the trash bag in search of more prizes. I think it's just meant to be a gut thing, Avies. The internet can't tell us what to do here. The internet can always tell us what to do. See, I have a list right here. Avery began reciting. Number 1, visit their final resting place? Okay, well we're not in New York so we can't do that. Number 2, release butterflies, Bonnie scoffed. Sure, let me just grab my net. Avery laughed. Number 3 is more reasonable. Write a letter, poem, or blog. Poem? Blog? Who are these people? Okay. Number 4 is play their favorite song. Do you know what it is? No, but Lucky would, said Avery. Lucky will probably tell us it's some death metal track just to mess with us. I guess if she ever answers her phone, we can find out. Now Avery's voice took on the flinty edge she used to conceal when her feelings had been hurt, though she would never admit it. Bonnie knew how hard she tried to connect with their youngest sister, elusive as any butterfly herself. The trick to loving Lucky, Bonnie wanted to tell Avery, was to respect her need to be free. Let her come and go as she pleased and eventually, she would land on you. But, as per usual, Bonnie decided not to get involved. Moving on, said Avery. 5, we can hold a special remembrance ceremony. 6, express loving sentiments with flowers. None of these sound like Nikki. I know. Okay, the last suggestion on the list is to take a seat. That's it? Bonnie frowned to herself. That's the whole suggestion? To sit down? That's all it says. Take a seat. I guess we can do that. I'm already sitting at my desk. Should I change seats? Yeah, take a different seat. Sit on the floor. Okay, you sit on the floor too. Bonnie crawled down to the landing floor and leaned her back against the wall, closing her eyes. She could hear the seagulls and her neighbors quietly arguing, the man repeating I told you, and, beyond that, the slow crashing of waves. The sun glowed golden through the skin of her eyelids. The air smelled of salt and garbage and light. Do you feel like this is doing anything? She asked. I don't think it's meant to do anything, said Avery. It's just meant to be an opportunity for us to remember her and feel, our grief. Fun, said Bonnie. Are you feeling it? My grief? I guess so. I might also just be hungry. She had intended it to be funny, but Avery was silent on the other end. Are you, she asked tentatively, feeling it? She heard Avery breathing shallowly down the phone. I'm so angry with her, Avery whispered. Isn't that fucked up? I know I should feel sad, but mostly I just feel angry at her. I think that's normal, right? You should ask Chidi, she would know. It doesn't feel normal. I could hurt her, If she was here, I'd punch her in the neck. Bonnie smiled. That's a pretty weird place to punch someone. Well, I wouldn't want to hit her face. Just get close to it, so she'd know I was really, really mad at her. I get that. I'd punch her in the neck too. Yeah, but you'd probably kill her if you did that. Too late. The words hung between them, vibrating. How are you really, Bon? Asked Avery. How's the nightclub thingy? It's fine. Bonnie shrugged. I'm working tonight. Far away in London, Avery gave a little hum of dissatisfaction. What are you doing there? We're so not LA people. Maybe I am, said Bonnie. But Bonnie didn't think of herself as any kind of person, LA or otherwise. She had been a boxer for so long she'd forgotten to become a person. She'd chosen the city because it was far away from where she'd been training in New York and seemed like an easy enough place to get a job. She didn't care if she liked it. She was only there to escape. Living in LA is like dating a really beautiful person who has nothing to say, said Avery. It's fine for a while because, look at them, but eventually you're going to realize you need to be around people who read books and have their real noses. Bonnie frowned. Had Avery even been to LA in the past decade? How could she know what it was like to live there? I don't know how long I'll be here, she said noncommittally. The only place she had any fighting spirit was in the ring. Outside the ropes, it was easier to capitulate, especially with Avery, whose self-assuredness was like an anvil anchoring every conversation they had. You could come stay with us, Avery exclaimed. I know Chidi would love it. And there's got to be a good boxing gym in North London. I'm not training anymore. I told you that. Fine, forget the gym. You don't have to fight if you really don't want to. You could coach, you could become a sports manager, you could start a charity. Just remember who you are, Bonnie. Bonnie closed her eyes again. She suddenly felt very tired. And who is that? She asked. Well, for starters, you're a women's world champion. I can't even remember half the competitions you've won, but I know it's a lot. You're the strongest person I know, inside and out. And you're my sister. Please note that none of the aforementioned descriptors include being a bouncer. Except I am a bouncer. That's exactly what I am. Avery was quiet. Bonnie could practically hear the machinations of her mind whirring, testing out which tack to try next. Nikki wouldn't want this for you, you know, Avery said eventually. So, thought Bonnie, she had landed on invoking the wishes of the dead. A classic. She would want you to be doing what you love, Avery continued. Bonnie bounced her head softly against the wall behind her. Sometimes I hate what I love, she said. A beat on the other end. Even me? Avery asked. Never you, said Bonnie, though she knew perfectly well Avery would take her remark that way. That was, she supposed, why she said it. Avery made a noise between a hum and a growl. Well, I just love you, she said. That's why I'm pushing you. I know, said Bonnie. I love you too. Without the two. It was what Nikki used to say to them. No two. Just love. Look, I gotta go for my run. I'll call you next week? Hummed Avery. You can't run forever. Bonnie changed into her shorts and sports bra and set off toward the beach. She ran 5 miles in the sand a day, then did a series of calisthenic exercises on the bars at Muscle Beach. It was hardly the grueling training regimen she was used to, but it kept her from going completely soft. She didn't particularly enjoy having an audience of tourists milling around watching the bodybuilders who frequented the place, but it was cheaper than a gym, and she garnered far less attention than the bulging, bronzed men, pumped up as inflatable pool toys, who spent their days peacocking around the bench presses. She was often the only woman on the bars, certainly the only one who could do 100 pull-ups in under 5 minutes, but she was used to that from the boxing gym. She hadn't played team sports since middle school and had rarely gone beyond surface banter with her sparring partners. She had, she felt, all the social grace of a grizzly bear. On the bars, as in life, she was left to herself, which, she told herself, was exactly how she liked it. Except since she started training at 15, she had never been alone, not really. A boxer in a ring may seem as if they are on their own, but pan back a few feet and their trainer will always be there in the corner, taking every blow with them. A truly great trainer sees as their fighter sees, feels as their fighter feels. And the fighter needs that support, relies on it as completely as a child does a mother. It's the secret vulnerability at the heart of the sport, that intimate dependence. And yet from this surrender to reliance comes a capacity for individual resilience that's almost inhuman. Boxers are trained to be all fight, no flight. Bonnie had seen many a boxer knocked flat on her back, but she had never seen one run from the ring. Despite the referee's instruction at the beginning of every fight to protect yourself at all times, boxing required an overriding of one's deepest natural instincts to protect oneself at all costs. Inevitably, you had to take pain to deliver it. The first time Bonnie entered a boxing gym, Nikki had been by her side. She was 15 and Nikki was 12. Their parents had entrusted her to walk Nikki home across the park from school each afternoon while they were at work. Avery had graduated from high school early and was already killing herself with a double course load at Columbia, and 10-year-old Lucky was put in an after-school program while their mom was at work. One afternoon, instead of continuing west from the park to their apartment, Bonnie guided Nikki south with her toward Midtown without a word. By that time, Bonnie had been watching nothing but boxing movies for weeks, forcing them all to reenact scenes from Raging Bull and Rocky with her. She was obsessed before she ever stepped foot in a ring, but their mother considered the sport barbaric and refused to pay for lessons. It was their father, an amateur boxer in high school, who had come out of a drunken stupor just long enough to slip Bonnie the money and tell her to go try it out sometime. Bonnie had looked up boxing gyms on the school computer and picked the one nearest their apartment, which was how they found themselves outside of Golden Ring, a storefront boxing gym of no major repute. It was winter and the gym's big front window was steamed over, the figures sparring and skipping rope on the other side blurred silhouettes. Bonnie stood frozen outside, suddenly too nervous to go in, but Nikki pushed open the door. It was fetid within, steamy and warm. The air was filled with rhythmic hisses, thuds, pops, and staccato slaps. Bonnie stood at the entrance, her eyes racing from person to person. They were all men, all much older than her, all completely absorbed in training. Nobody even glanced up as they walked in. Suddenly, a bell rang, and the noise dimmed. Men dropped their jump ropes or broke from sparring to grab water bottles and towels. Now was the time, but Bonnie's nerve was faltering. Nikki must have known this because she walked over to a tall figure who had just finished jumping rope and peered up at him. His body reminded Bonnie of a panther's. She could see his muscles ripple under his skin as he moved. "Excuse me," said Nikki. "My sister wants to learn to box. Can you teach her?" He smiled down at her, his handsome face streaming with sweat. "She'll want to talk to Pavel about that." He nodded at a tall white man leaning against the far wall. Nikki thanked him and grabbed Bonnie's hand. She pulled Bonnie after her, repeating the request once they reached him. Pavel dismissed the boxer he had been watching on the heavy bag with a nod, then looked down at them serenely. His face was beautiful in its contradictions. A thick neck and delicate, curled ears, a brutish square nose set below dancing blue eyes lined with long black lashes. To Bonnie at that age, he was firmly in the category of old person, though she would learn later he was not yet 30. He held Bonnie in his gaze for a long moment. "You want to fight?" he asked. His voice, when he spoke, was thickened by a Russian accent. Bonnie nodded without a word. Pavel turned his light eyes toward Nikki. "And you, little one?" "I'm going to be a journalist," she said primly. "So I'll just take notes." Pavel smiled. "You need pen?" Nikki gave him a knowing look and tapped the side of her temple. "It's all up here." Pavel nodded to indicate this was fair enough. "Okay, you," he pointed to Nikki. "Take notes." He turned to Bonnie. "You, come." He guided her in front of the big mirror on the back wall, stopping her about 6 feet away from her reflection. Up close, the glass was coated in a hazy layer of dried sweat, snot, and spit that softened the edges of anyone it reflected. Pavel instructed Bonnie to take a stance. Tentatively, Bonnie separated her feet hips width. "You feel good?" Pavel asked. Bonnie nodded. Pavel extended one thick finger and pushed Bonnie's shoulder, knocking her easily off balance. He shook his head. "Not solid. Try again." Bonnie repositioned her feet, so they were at an angle underneath her hips, and locked her knees. "Solid?" asked Pavel, his index extended. Bonnie nodded again, more confidently this time. Pavel pressed the tip of his finger to her shoulder blade and sent her staggering without effort. "Not solid," he said. Bonnie glanced over at Nikki nervously. "You got this," Nikki mouthed at her. Pavel pointed at the wooden floorboards beneath her. "I want that you place feet shoulder width apart," he said. Now, he showed her how to relax her muscles, bend her knees, and plant her lead foot flat on the floor, then raise her back heel slightly with her toes planted so she was ready to pivot. At his instruction, Bonnie brought her hands just above her chin and made fists. "Your knuckles," said Pavel, tapping her hands and pointing up. "Always to the sky. Now tuck elbows." He instructed her to balance her weight equally between her front and back foot, then check her stance in the mirror. She could not know it at the time, but he was giving her a more useful lesson on gravity and the body than she had ever learned in school. When she was set up, he pushed her shoulder with his finger again. She didn't budge. He circled her, nudging from different angles but, with her feet planted as he'd shown her, Bonnie could not be tipped. Pavel crossed his arms and nodded. "Now, you are solid." Bonnie looked over at her sister in delight. She had found, for the first time in her life, her feet. Bonnie never put much store in the concept of fate, but she knew that she was meant to meet Pavel. It was Pavel who showed her how to move like water in the ring. In contrast to the plant and hook technique many other trainers favored, he taught a long-arm jab and move style, encouraging his boxers to flow with liquid agility around the ring. This suited Bonnie, whose earlier dance training and natural energy meant she was happiest when ducking, weaving, and bouncing around her opponent. He schooled her on how to slip punches and hit from a distance, how to plant her feet and dance from the ankles up with swift reflexes that were more protective than steel armor. She could never have known how small the odds were of finding someone willing to even talk to a girl, let alone train her. There were only a handful of good trainers who worked with women in the whole country at that time, let alone in the city. But Pavel had been taught to box back in Moscow by his father, who insisted on training all his children, including his daughter, so Pavel had seen firsthand what a female fighter was capable of. His sister had been a natural, but she'd gotten pregnant young and remained in Russia to marry and raise a family. Pavel, meanwhile, had become a youth world champion, then moved to America to pursue a respectable but not exceptional professional career before a broken eye socket forced him into early retirement. Pavel molded Bonnie into the fighter she was born to be and remained her trainer for the next 15 years. Until last year, she had lived her entire adult life with him in her corner. Here is what she could not admit to anyone, not even, for many years, herself: she wanted more from Pavel. She didn't know when it started, this wanting, but once the seed was planted in her it kept growing until she was like a cracking pot that cannot contain its plant. The truth was that she wanted him everywhere, not just in her corner. The specifics of her wants were not extravagant, but the very fact of them felt enormous. She wanted, for instance, to sit in a dark movie theater beside him and watch something that had nothing to do with boxing, a romantic comedy maybe, or the new Marvel movie. She wanted to prepare her special morning smoothie for him, then sit in silence with him while they drank it. She wanted to watch him brush his teeth. She wanted him to turn in his sleep and reach for her. He had wrapped her hands thousands of times, but what she really wanted was for him to hold hers. Hold her hand. She was like a teenage girl. She sweated even thinking about it. No one in Bonnie's life would describe her as a romantic. Between her grueling training schedule and natural inclination toward asceticism, almost every part of her life was in service to toughness. But her heart remained tender. And she was not completely inexperienced in the world of romance, during her 20s she had, if not relationships, then relations with a handful of men, usually other athletes with whom she made arrangements that ensured each got their physical needs met. She had even engaged in an ill-advised fling with a boxing promoter everyone called Knuckle. His name, in retrospect, should have been the first warning sign. Pavel was married for most of that time to Anahid, an Armenian war photographer who was rarely home and usually, it seemed, narrowly avoiding kidnap. Bonnie had met her a few times and was struck by both her beauty and her steeliness. She was scrupulously polite and seemed to treat most interactions as negotiations in which she was primarily concerned with getting out alive. By the time she and Pavel quietly divorced, Pavel had been Bonnie's trainer for over a decade. If she was honest, the wanting had been there all along, but the hope started after his divorce. Hope was the dangerous thing. She didn't think Pavel had met anyone since, although thanks to his notoriously private nature she couldn't be sure. Regardless, one thing was clear, nothing changed in his treatment of her. He saw Bonnie as his young protégé, nothing else. She may not have had a wealth of romantic experience, but she was woman enough to know when a man wanted her. Pavel simply did not. She was sure she could have lived with it, this ache of longing at the center of her life, this inner hollow in the shape of him, could even convince herself that it was good for her boxing. After all, a satisfied boxer was a soft boxer, if she had never hoped, and he had never betrayed her. At 9 p.m. she walked over to Peachy's on Windward Avenue. Despite its proximity to the Venice boardwalk, the bar had successfully eschewed becoming a tourist destination thanks to a rigorous door policy established and upheld by Peachy himself. Peachy was the unofficial mayor of Venice who, in his own words, knew everyone worth knowing, had befriended everyone worth befriending, and fucked everyone worth fucking on the West Side. A British expat, Peachy was the son of a Congolese mother and white English father who had sent him to Eton at the age of 11, then promptly divorced each other never to speak again. He had the desperate charm of a child who has had to make a family of his friends and a handsome, boyish face, despite being well into middle age. During the day, he could often be spotted cruising around the neighborhood in his vintage sky blue pickup truck, his beloved pit bull seated by his side, sipping iced coffee, puffing on a Camel Gold, and chatting to anyone who flagged him down. He'd lived in Venice for decades and started Peachy's a few years back to create a place where his friends could drink and dance for cheap without having to drive to the east side. His door policy was notoriously mercurial. Artists, surfers, models, bikers, musicians, and anyone, of any gender, who Peachy might like to sleep with were let in. Tourists, suits, most media types, and all Hollywood scumbags were turned away on sight. Famous actors who, priding themselves on their authenticity, made the trip from Malibu or the Hollywood Hills were let in but without ceremony or special treatment. Regulars and old friends of Peachy's were treated as VIPs, regardless of their worldly standing, and were always invited to cut the line and go right on in. Of course, such a door policy required muscle to back it up, which was where Bonnie came in. Peachy worked side by side with Fuzz, a thick-necked former weightlifter from Jamaica, who had been manning the door since the bar's inception, breaking up fights, ensuring only the best-looking underage girls got in, and generally making sure peace reigned under Peachy's stern but benevolent rule. Peachy proudly claimed Fuzz got his name because the two of them were as close as fuzz on a peach, but Fuzz quickly set Bonnie straight that his mom had given him the nickname at birth after he came out with a full head of hair. Bonnie had shown up looking for a job a little less than a year ago and been hired on site. Peachy, a boxing fan, recognized her as the promising female fighter who had mysteriously quit after just a few professional bouts. Blue-eyed, blonde-haired, and, most importantly, female, Bonnie was not exactly typical bouncer material. But Peachy loved the optics of it, not to mention the fact Bonnie was strong enough to take on 99% of the men she encountered without raising her heart rate. And, for the other 1%, there was Fuzz. When Bonnie arrived at the bar for her shift that night, fireworks for the 4th were already booming overhead. Peachy was standing outside with a cigarette dangling from his lip as he looked thoughtfully at a large, freshly painted mural on the opposite wall. It depicted two smiling pit bulls on either side of what appeared to be a screaming child with the words "Pitbull Love" emblazoned in cursive above the trio. I love it, I do," he was saying. "It's just, does the kid appear to be a bit, I don't know, terrified?" He was talking to Stella, a local artist known for her surrealist animal murals, which could be spotted on walls from Mar Vista to Santa Monica. In fact, Bonnie walked past two of her pieces, a panther crying rainbow tears and a unicorn smoking a pipe, each evening on her way to the bar. Stella was usually in the midst of either kicking or, as she called it, recommitting to a crystal meth habit, a substance she extolled as a powerful artistic conduit or condemned as the bane of her existence depending on where in this cycle you happened to catch her. Today, judging by her twitchy demeanor and roving, wide-eyed stare, Bonnie guessed she was back in a recommittal. No, 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 man, Stella said, practically vibrating beside him. That kiddo's excited. These two pups want to play with him. They're his family now, you know? Peachy nodded, frowning. But would he be screaming, he asked. If they're just trying to play with him? Nah, man, he laughing. He got a pit for a mom and a pit for a pop and they're going to look after him, like, forever. That's what I was trying to artistically convey. Right, said Peachy slowly. It's just, well, I wanted the mural to communicate that pit bulls are lovable and safe, you know, since they get such a bad rap. But I'm not trying to say that they're a replacement for parents. They're still definitely pets. Albeit wonderful, highly intelligent ones. But pets nonetheless. Totally, man, totally. Stella hopped from one foot to the other and scratched her stomach with both hands. How's this? I paint the dog's eyes red, like love hearts, you know, that way it's super clear they have only love for the kid, you know, and mean him. Stella gulped seriously. Not 1 ounce of harm. Right, paint the eyes red, repeated Peachy. Could that look, I don't know, a little demonic? Stella threw her head back and cackled. Above her, firework sparks streaked down the face of the night sky like tears. Only one way to find out, man. And that was just a glimpse into the vibrant and emotional world of Blue Sisters. Coco Mellors doesn't just write characters, she brings them to life in a way that feels almost tangible. You're right there with them, in their highs, their lows, and everything in between. This book reminds us that family isn't always easy, but it's worth the mess. It's about connection, forgiveness, and finding home in the people who know us best, even when we don't always see eye to eye. Thank you for joining me in exploring Blue Sisters today. If this story has sparked your interest, I'd love to hear your thoughts, whether it's about the writing, the characters, or even your own experiences with family dynamics. Drop a comment below, and let's talk. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button for more bookish content. Until next time, take care, and remember, home is not a place, it's a feeling. Keep finding yours.